Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. I'm Sahad Tabajo, Director of the Peace, Stability, and Transition Practice Unit at Chemonics International, and I will be moderating this session from Beirut. Our esteemed panelists and I very much appreciate that you've chosen to spend your morning, afternoon, or evening with us. COVID-19 has wreaked havoc on many aspects of life, upending all that is normal everywhere. But in fragile and conflict-affected states, it has disrupted local peacebuilders' efforts to return to normal. In most places, it has thrown significant obstacles in their way, while in others, it has opened new avenues to advance some aspects of the peace agenda. Today, we will hear 5 stories that explore the ways in which the pandemic has impacted peacebuilding and how local peacebuilders have responded. Each of our speakers will share a story from a different point on the conflict curve or the peacebuilding process when they felt the effects of the pandemic. We will first hear a story from Yemen, where our local partners were just embarking on a participatory conflict analysis exercise to determine their intervention strategy. In Lebanon, our storyteller had been on the cusp of engaging communities and local leaders and designing solutions when the world moved online. Meanwhile, in Iraq, lockdowns were imposed just as local peace committees had been poised to undertake various peace initiatives, which then had to be altered. On the other hand, in Guatemala, where our colleague was busy consolidating peace gains by strengthening justice systems, he found himself having to take hypothetical lemons to make judicial lemonade. Finally, in Afghanistan, women leaders fighting to be included in the ongoing peace negotiations found a novel way to do so. There will be an opportunity for a Q&A after each story for 5 minutes, and we have reserved the last 20 minutes for more questions and a general discussion. You can also use the chat room to pose questions, comments, or engage with other audience members. Please keep your microphones muted and note that the live button next to your name should remain in gray. If you wish to engage with speakers in the final Q&A, or you wish to pose your question directly, then press that button to appear to everyone. If you do so, make sure that your camera and microphone are activated by pressing on the little icons of the microphone and camera on the top left. We will now set the scene for our first story. The war in Yemen has precipitated the worst humanitarian crisis in the world. The national-level conflict between the internationally recognized government of Yemen, supported by the Saudi-led coalition, and Ansarullah, known colloquially as the Houthis, began in 2014. By 2017, Ansarullah had consolidated their control over the north, and the SLC-backed forces, Saudi-backed forces, regained the majority of the south and parts of the middle, western, and eastern regions. Shortly thereafter, the long-brewing grievances in the south of Yemen materialized in the launch of a new actor, the Southern Transitional Council, STC, which seeks to reinstate the independent country of South Yemen that existed before 1990. The war has reached a stalemate on the national level while also fracturing into a series of sub-conflicts. As the conflict nears the end of its 7th year, 80% of the population relies on humanitarian assistance to survive. Only half of the country's medical facilities are functioning, and almost 8 million children are out of school. By the end of 2019, 3.6 million Yemenis were displaced due to the conflict, and 20 million were facing food insecurity. The Jusur project, a component of the UK-funded Yemen peacebuilding program, aims to reduce local conflict and strengthen social cohesion in the 4 targeted governorates of Ma'rib, Taz, Hodeidah, and Shabwa. You will see them circled on your screen. Along with our local partner, Deeproot Consulting, Jusur works with local communities, women and youth, civil society, and formal and informal authorities and leaders throughout Yemen to address patterns of grievance that are sticking points in national peace dialogues. It seeks to create space for underrepresented voices to participate in peacebuilding. Jusur was about to engage local communities in a thorough conflict analysis when the pandemic struck. Based on the results of the analysis, the team would have designed activities to address certain conflict dynamics. This story is told from the perspective of the team that was on the ground during the height of the pandemic, speaking, interviewing, and engaging with key stakeholders. We will now hear from Rafat, a founding partner of Deeproot, who is overseeing this fieldwork on the ground. Over to you, Rafat.
Thank you so much, Sahar, and thanks to everyone who's joined us today to listen to these stories from across the countries that are operating under Chemonics, and to look at the impact of the pandemic. When we first started in our work in Marib specifically, which is one of the governorates there, I was struck by what one of the local leaders there told us. He said, "Our desert is open and our hearts are equally open." We didn't expect that soon after we would actually get to fully realize how open the deserts are. And I'll start maybe with that story. As Sahar mentioned, we just got the project started towards the end of March of this year, and it was supposed to begin with our analytical work in April, and that's exactly when the pandemic hit hard in Yemen, and a lot of our usual activities were stopped. And so we built a team of locally based coordinators in the different governorates that we work on, and of specialists across the country who have been working hard since then to try and get this project off the ground, not only facing the difficulties of the ongoing conflict that Sahar just presented an overview of, which made a lot of the travel, a lot of the infrastructure for telecommunication, for mobility across the country very difficult. But also we suffered from the pandemic and a very difficult year of climate change impact in Yemen, where multiple areas were hit by floods, cyclones, and very devastating effects of that. And so while we tried our best to work around that, we had to do at least one convening of the team. And what we have faced is what I will be speaking about from the perspective of our different brave and courageous local coordinators who are working on the ground. And so from Marib, we had to bring the team from Marib and from Shabwa and from other locations into a meeting at least once to try and build that initial sense of common purpose and understand what we are going to do together. But the roads from Marib to Sana'a and to other areas from there is hit by the conflict, ongoing active confrontations taking place. And so the only way to get through is to go through the desert. So it's not an official road, it's literally in the middle of the desert. This first photo is actually taken by, all these photos are taken by our local coordinators on the way to attend this very initial workshop. They had to be stuck in the middle of the desert for hours and hours when their cars would break out and wait for help. And actually, one of the very difficult moments was when our coordinator in Shabwa, Al-Anud, who actually was a lady traveling back to Shabwa after the workshop, only to be faced with a storm in the middle of the desert, where they lost all their GPS abilities and the ability to continue driving, and had to wait in the middle of the desert for a few hours until it cleared. And it wasn't at that point, as you can imagine, clear what's going to happen from there. In another location, in Taiz, which you might have heard of if you follow Yemen, one of the impacts of the conflict is that the road between the center of the city and to get outside the city, which used to be 6 kilometers, from these two white dots, it used to be 6 kilometers, you can just cross it and then go off to the other governorates, is now blocked. And instead of being able to do that, people need to go through 90 kilometers now, all across, in very difficult terrain, across mountains and valleys and roads that are not made for travel of cars to get to the other point. And one of our coordinators had to do that trip multiple times. And this is just an example of the trips that they have to go through, the roads that they have to go through, how they get stuck for hours at a time if a car is broken or there is an accident, and they cannot move there. So that's just to show you how difficult it is to begin with to get together physically which meant that we had to, on top of the pandemic, to think of creative ways to conduct our activities. So we had to do a wide-scale survey of around 1,600 people across the 4 governorates, which our great partner, Yemen Polling Center, took care of, which meant we had to change our ways of working. We had to rely only on local enumerators and local coordinators. We had to conduct our whole training online, find places where we can get good internet access, which was very limited at times, and try to get through with what we can. Use all the technology that we are able to make work in such an environment. WhatsApp was always our friend. We are constantly on WhatsApp with everyone in the team, trying to coordinate things, coordinate activities, build the analysis to a level that would allow us to actually design our activities. So I wanted to give you just an idea of the difficulties facing people on the ground in Yemen. And again, I'm only here to convey the voices of the coordinators and the team that are working on the ground, mostly for the same reason, because if they would have joined to tell their story, we couldn't guarantee that the internet would hold up for them to present that. And I'll just maybe leave you with 3 thoughts on what made us able to go through it. I'm happy to report that we actually finished our inception phase. We finished our work on the analysis. We were able to conduct a very thorough conflict analysis, systems conflict analysis, and come out with very clear program going forward that we will start to implement from next month. And what helped us to get there was really trying to create a flexible working environment where people are, working whenever they're able to connect to the internet, and you never know when. Trying to work constantly with real-time feedback and trying to figure out what is happening at every moment, especially at moments of travel. As you saw, the security aspects are very high. You never know what's happening on the road. We also utilized technology to its extent. So the virtual platforms we used, from Zoom to WhatsApp, to really try and get that sense of working together while not being able to work in the same location. And also with the people, the stakeholders that we had to work with in the communities, as much as possible did things by phone, by WhatsApp, by remote data collection. But then when we had to rely on getting people together, making sure that we do it within the safety precautions. And finally, making space to have fun. We can never underestimate the difficulty of working in such situations, with each members of staff having to suffer at the personal level as well, not only from the conflict, but from people in their families, in their households, being impacted by COVID-19, not having enough medical attention and enough healthcare facilities available in the country. And so within all that, the whole mental well-being agenda becomes a real tangible challenge that we have to pay a lot of attention to. And so we always made sure to make enough space to have fun, to work as a team, and to try and do what we can within these very difficult circumstances. I'll stop there, and maybe if we have any questions, I'd be happy to answer.
Thank you so much, Rafat. We will take any questions from attendees now. Feel free to use the chat room as well to pose any questions. All right. So if there are no questions right away, we'll warm up and we'll have more time for questions at the end. So let's move on then to our second story, which is from Lebanon. Lebanon is a country in the midst of perpetual crises, or so it feels to those of us who live here. Peace practitioners have long joked that Lebanon is in states of pre-conflict, conflict, and post-conflict at the same time, all the time. The last decade and a half of political turmoil and regional conflict have taken their toll on the country's fragile political and economic systems. Continuous political deadlock and stalemate have severely affected government functions and policy, leading to a steady deterioration in public services and almost 10 years of economic stagnation. The Syrian conflict, which reduced cross-border trade and brought 1.5 million refugees into the country, placed additional strain on Lebanese communities. Furthermore, Lebanon's centralized governance system and limited financial resources hamstrung municipalities. Most were unable to provide basic services to both Lebanese and refugee populations or effectively manage their communities' challenges. Grievances and tensions came to a head on October 17, 2019, when mass protests erupted across the country. Demonstrators blocked roads, burned tires, and clashed with security forces and supporters of the ruling political parties. They decried the rampant corruption in the country, as well as the deteriorating economic situation. As foreign reserves dwindled, the Lebanese lira, long pegged to the US dollar, collapsed. COVID-19 restrictions only deepened the crisis, shuttering struggling businesses. With 1 million people already living below the poverty line, 2020 saw 45% of the Lebanese population slide into poverty, according to World Bank data. USAID's Lebanon Community Support Program is partnering with municipalities, regional water establishments, civil society, education and training institutions, and the private sector to provide a broad range of support to underserved and vulnerable communities. CSP is improving the delivery of essential services and enhancing economic opportunities, primarily in Lebanon's North, South, and Bekaa Valley regions. The program works closely with local communities to understand conflict dynamics, identify acute needs, aggravating tensions, and provide assistance to address them. The program utilizes a range of tools, including a rapid analysis and design methodology, as well as local systems frameworks. Rafi, our second storyteller, and his organization Peace Labs, partnered with CSP to undertake systems analyses with local actors to inform project design. In a typical village, he would meet with the mayor, representatives of political parties, youth, women, small business owners, as well as regular community members. The lockdown was enforced in Lebanon just as he was heading to the field to build consensus around solutions and win over these actors' buy-in. Over to you, Rafi.
There was once a merchant who, after years of bad business, was cursing his bad luck. A traveler was passing by and he asked the merchant what was troubling him. Hearing that the merchant was a man of great ill fortune, the traveler opened his knapsack and pulled out a strange-looking device made from two crystal glasses stuck together. They were decorated with strange drawings, and one glass was green and the other was red, and inside each glass were some strange seeds, each of the same color as their glass. "Well, you've just run into some good luck meeting me," said the traveler. "This is exactly what you need. 2 little pots of luck." The merchant was somewhat surprised, but the traveler explained to him that these seeds were seeds of luck. The green seeds brought good luck and the red seeds brought bad luck. The two glasses were joined and one was filled up. It caused multiple incidents of good or bad luck according to which the type of seed was overflowing the glass. The merchant, thrilled, thanked him for the gift and hardly managed to hear the traveler's last words, warning the merchant how difficult it was to use the glasses effectively. As expected, he carefully examined the green seeds, the lucky ones. Though wasn't familiar with them, he was sure he could find someone that could sell him several new containers. And so he covered the top vessel with great care, being sure not to drop it. Then he looked at the red seeds and thought that the best way to avoid them filling the glass would be to empty them out right there. So that's what he did. And off he went, continuing his journey. And a little later, he met a woman who, seeing his seed jars, must have recognized them. She ran up to him and asked him for a good handful of seeds. The merchant roundly refused, and the woman left, cursing him under her breath. "What do they want me to do?" he thought sadly. "I can't just throw away my good luck." He continued his way and had many other similar encounters. And as the time went on, the merchant saw that the only red jar was filling up. It seemed more or less logical, because otherwise the jars wouldn't have much power. He just stopped every now and then to empty the red seeds out. However, the red jar was filling up faster and faster, and it reached a point where he could hardly empty it before it had filled up again. And finally, it started overflowing. Well, that's gone and done, thought the merchant. All I need now is another pile of bad luck. He looked all the way down the road and saw that the seeds he had emptied out had grown into great big weeds which had choked to death all the other plants in the area. And when the local villagers saw this, they were furious and set out finding out who caused the destruction of their crops. The merchant almost escaped suspicion, but the woman who he had refused to give seeds to betrayed him, and he had to run from the village through a hail of kicks and punches. And that was only the start of the series of ill fortune the merchant had to suffer. Without doubt, those seeds were extremely powerful, and all that power had backfired against him. In just 3 days, he tried 100 times to get rid of those jars, but it would never stop his run of bad luck. Instead, he had to find some way to fill up the green jar and not spill on the other red seeds. It was a big hassle. So he removed the lid of the green jar to find to his horror that most of the green seeds had disappeared. While he was lamenting his poor luck again, he took a moment to examine the pictures on the jars. They seemed to be instructions. In the pictures, the red jar was always closed and the green one always opened. It seemed that anyone could take as many green seeds as they liked. He decided to continue his journey in that manner. Soon, he met a man who asked him for some seeds, and the merchant told the man to help himself. Immediately after this, his luck began to change. The villagers who had been chasing this merchant weren't far off now, but his new friend, who he had given seeds to, came to the rescue by pointing them in the wrong direction. Similar things occurred with them, with many others he met on the road, and the merchant realized that if, instead of throwing them away, he gave the seeds as a gift to others, then the green jar was the one that would fill up. And after offering the seeds to everyone, the green jar would begin to overflow. Of course, good luck stayed with him, and wonderful things started to happen. One man he helped became a very rich man, and the rich man thanked the merchant in the form of luxuries and expensive gifts. Other people considered the merchant to be such a good man that they put him forward to be a mayor. Sometime later, the merchant bumped into the traveler again who had given him the jars. And after greeting him, the merchant told him of his adventure and he thanked him profusely. But before taking his leave, he asked the traveler, "Why did you give me the lucky jars? Did you no longer want to have so much good luck?" And the traveler, laughing loudly, answered, "Don't tell me you still have them. Those seeds don't really do anything. The magic of the jars is pure foolishness. All they do is make some stupid seeds increase or decrease in number. Some of them are edible and some of them are poisonous, but they have no effect at all on any luck. I heard they were invented by a wizard's stupid, clumsy apprentice." "You what?" exclaimed the merchant, shocked. "I think it was an old teacher who found them and realized that they would be a good way to teach people about how best to use your luck. And in fact, keep the bad luck for yourself and share the good with others. And in truth, this is only a way to attract good luck and avoid the bad luck, and boy, does it work. And when you share out your bad luck and try to keep the good luck to yourself, you sure see that no one would want to share the good one with you. The seeds had nothing to do with all of this. Everything happened to you was your own work." And the merchant certainly did understand now, and as the traveler walked off in the distance with the little jars in his hands, he searched the faces of the townsfolk looking for who among them most needed to learn how best to use their luck. So I would like to turn this to some of our attendees and ask them who they think maybe would be the merchant, or who is this magician who he met, or what the seeds might symbolize, or anything that might, any reflections you might have on this story. You can either use the chat box or tell us maybe even to go live with us and ask the story in front of everyone, or ask the question, or give your feedback. I think we're having some things in the chat box that luck is what you make of your choices. It's your beliefs that create success. Great. Thank you, Deidra. And thank you, Cosmo, we only have your email address. Thank you. Heather is saying, with all the talk about how to distribute COVID vaccines, I think the world leaders should be listening to the story. Yes. That is actually very true to what we faced in those villages, because people were very busy with COVID. I mean, not the vaccines at that point, but they were busy with uh, dealing with COVID. That our intervention was took a back seat, and that was a very big lesson for us, thinking and knowing that um, we are here to bring maybe economic opportunities when and where they are needed the most at a time in Lebanon's history. But COVID brought people together in a way that we have never seen before, and maybe this is a good takeaway for us from COVID. Is one way to see it. Thank you, Heather, for bringing this up. I think we missed Michael's comment. It's really important the staff are given the space and the permission to have fun with the many. Will be a new experience. What kind of activities did you have? This was a previous question. Yeah, this was for a previous story. All right. I think we will also have some time towards the end to come back to the story. So if unless Sarah says peace and harmony are like good luck seeds, it multiplies tenfold the more we share with others. Yes, that is also actually what happened with us, with people so busy with COVID and seeing that there are people from their own country who are also suffering the same economical crisis and COVID coming there to offer also some economic opportunities at a time that was needed the most. It did have the similar effect as the lucky seeds for them, as they were fighting together, and as it was very difficult for us to analyze at that point the conflicts in the villages that we knew throughout history existed. At that point, it was difficult for us to handle or deal with these conflicts because people did not give those conflicts any importance. All they were thinking about was how to deal with the economic crisis and COVID together. We were like bringing these lucky seeds to them to as Emily is saying, or was it? Yes, as Sarah was saying, to multiply that for them. And Emily is saying, I think the imagination that is provoked by storytelling has adults set down their barriers and bring people to a table where they are more willing to talk.
Yes, it was a different story.
Yes, exactly. This is it was a different story, and this is what it did to people. It was really a surprise to us how much people were working together. I mean, we can tell you, but it's not the same as experiencing the history of conflict in Lebanon and seeing how there was this huge schism between people for this long time, and then how they came together during this time. The merchant was so excited upon receiving the seeds that he did not take the instructions, which he only read later. It was also a lesson about taking a pause, tempering eagerness, and listening to more intently before launching. Exactly. This is what we learned. This is Lawrence. Thank you very much, Lawrence, for voicing exactly what we learned. You know, when Sahar approached us to share our experience and with the CSP project, this was the exact lesson that we wanted to share. But we thought it wouldn't really strike a chord with people if we just come and tell them, this is what we learned. We thought, what would be a great story to say this? And what you shared, Lawrence, is exactly what we're trying to get to with the story: the pausing, the reflecting, and then deciding to actually take action based on what is everything that is changing in the environment, whether at the level of the conflict or at the level of the help that people were looking for. So yeah, thank you, Lawrence.
And if I can interject here, Rafi, I think listening to the story and knowing what was happening at the time, it particularly struck me the way that people were able to shift their own story around.
Mm-hmm.
We were going to try to understand the story of conflicts in their communities, which, as you said, we knew had been going on for decades. To them, within the space of months, that was no longer the main story. There was a new story that was the dominant story. As you said, the conflict dynamics that existed before took a back seat as people's priorities shifted. And they were suddenly more focused on how do we handle this current challenge, which in a way united people. And there's a saying in Arabic, the disaster brings people together. And I think we saw that happen on the ground in these villages firsthand.
Exactly. And Michael is saying, at a time of crisis such as COVID-19, speed trumps structure, and sometimes just getting things done for and with people are more important than creating structures and processes. Barriers were broken down across religious and sectarian barriers. Yes, this is also one of the things we learned when we paused, like Lauren said, when we paused, reflected, and like Sahar was just saying, when we realized that we are playing a different game now than when the project was planned and when the project was, when the plan of action was put before COVID, before all of that, when we realized that we are playing a different game, this is exactly what happened. We realized, okay, now we are shifting gears, we are going into something else, and we are taking this to a different place. Yeah, great. Thank you everyone for your participation, for humoring me and engaging in my story, and really getting all of this out of it. I will give it back to Sahar to continue with our storytellers. We will have some time at the end to come back to all the stories. So if we missed anything, or if you wanted an opportunity to say more, reflect more, maybe the other stories will also inspire things about this story, I will still, of course, be here to take it further. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you very much, Rafi. And we move to our next story number 3 from Iraq. Like other Iraqi territories occupied in 2014 by the so-called Islamic State in Iraq and Syria, Southwest Kirkuk suffered from atrocities committed by the extremist organization. The group killed and tortured its opponents, looted the area's wealth for its own gain, and spurred massive waves of displacement, both before and during the liberation operations in 2017. In that year alone, 2.7 million persons were internally displaced across Iraq. Even while ISIS still occupied the area, a number of tribal and community leaders, including the heads of the administrative units of Hawija, Zab, Rashad, Abbasi, Riyadh, and Multaqa, which you will see on the map in front of you, raised concerns that acts of revenge could undermine post-liberation efforts to rebuild this fractured community. Community leaders needed to take preventive measures to preserve the area's social fabric. In 2016, the United States Institute of Peace and its partner, Center for Peacebuilding, were able to launch an inclusive dialogue process between tribal leaders, the governor, key security actors, and heads of the area's administrative units, academics and civil society activists, that resulted in the realization of a peace agreement in June 2017 to strengthen the rule of law and increase stability. To sustain this agreement, community leaders agreed to establish local structures to monitor its implementation and address challenges that might arise. USIP and Senate continued their support by establishing 6 local peace committees, or LPCs, in the aforementioned administrative areas. In September 2019, Chemonics International and Peace Paradigms Organization, PPO, launched the Iraq Social Cohesion Program. The initiative aims to strengthen this local peace agreement by enabling communities in Southwest Kirkuk, through the LPCs, to identify and address the drivers of tension in an inclusive, transparent, conflict-sensitive, and systemic manner. Each LPC had already undertaken peace initiatives in their sub-district, ranging from resolving land disputes to addressing barriers to return for IDPs. The sustainability of the LPCs sits at the core of the design of the Iraq Social Cohesion Program. Chemonics International and PPO believe that increased capacity of LPCs to identify, analyze, and address local drivers of tension and conflict will increase social cohesion and resilience of communities most at risk from a resurgence of violent extremism. The story we're now about to hear is about Amina, a local resident in the Hawija district, recounted to us by Zainab Qasim, advisor with PPO, and the woman who was in charge of coordinating the LPC's work on the ground. Over to you, Zainab.
Thank you, Sahar, and thank you for all the guests and the participants joining this session. And hopefully we will manage to tell this story to inspire for broader, I would say, area in Southwest Kirkuk. Amina is a widow with 5 children in one of the small villages in rural area of Al-Abbasi sub-district, Southwest Kirkuk, far from the paved road. After suffering years of displacement due to ISIS attacks in the area, she was now living in randomly allocated poor quality housing, barely able to provide any decent living for her children. In March 2020, when the COVID-19 curfew was enforced in the area of Kirkuk, she didn't understand why the new restrictions had been put in place. She only knew that the assistance she normally received from the few generous families in the area had suddenly stopped. Full of fears and uncertainty, question mounted inside her head. How long would this situation last? How to or where to go, and to whom ask for help? What might happen to her? What was going out there, and why everybody saying don't go out? Was it ISIS back? Meanwhile, the Iraqi Social Cohesion Project was organizing solidarity patrols to support and inform those most at need, to build trust in the local peace committees. When several weeks later the patrol members showed up at her house, women volunteers, staff from the local health dispensary, and even the head of local peace committee, she was shocked. As they brought in a food basket, handed her leaflets, the awareness leaflets of the COVID. She didn't know that what to say even at the time. It wasn't the food basket that surprised her. It wasn't the awareness leaflet or the hygiene kit informing her to be careful about her COVID, about the COVID in the area. On the volunteers patrol, one of them said it was that someone cared and had reached out to her. It restored her faith in local leaders and her community. She couldn't help asking, how did you manage to move while there is full curfew? How did you know that we are here in need? While she had been feeling isolated and alone, the local peace committees had sprung into action, thinking of impact of COVID restriction on the community, especially on those underrepresented. The economic needs would rise, and the fragile trust and faith they had been working hard to rebuild after ISIS would start to break. They couldn't let people resort to ISIS for help. They couldn't let people go to feeling as neglected as they used to be. They had been under ISIS. They decided to set up solidarity patrols that could go door to door and restore the community sense of connection. Over many Zoom meetings and phone calls in last March and April, the LPC members in Hawija and its sub-district had to figure out many challenges. First, how they would find volunteers to help them. How would they get the access to the most vulnerable families? How would they secure the supplies? How would they coordinate with many different security forces and armed groups in Kirkuk? How would they manage to the security and health risk involved while they distribute all those materials? As the head of the LPC, they were also the head of the sub-district. The committee agreed that they would coordinate with the governor of Kirkuk to obtain exception letters allowing them to break lockdown rules set by the central government. In the same time, other LPC members who were also the officials in the area offered their cars, their ID to facilitate movement in the area. They set the criteria for selecting families most in need and worked with the local villages Mukhtar, which is, well, in our administrative language, it's similar to the mayor levels, to identify those families. At those calls, they didn't tire them up, but rather encourage them to do more for their communities. The ISC project team suggested cooperating with the official local disparity, and coordinating the efforts with the project Young Data Collector, including young women to ensure access to female-only household and to have an inclusive, diverse patrol. This mix of actors, local authorities, and community members meant greater support could be provided. The LPC members suggested local vendors and market to procure the basket items from, thus resolving the issue of interrupted supply lines while injecting more needed resources into the local economy. The patrol succeeded in reaching more than 250 houses in each of the 6 sub-districts of Hawija. Amina was relieved. The awareness information they gave her brightened her day. She knows now it's not ISIS. They are not back again to the area, it's only some sort of virus. And she can protect her children with the hygiene kits supplied. There were many items she was seeing for the first time, but they would help her shield her home and her family. Knowing all this effort had been made to reach her, restored her faith. Now she can wait more. She feels stronger now. She has hope. And she said, don't stop coming. She told them, there are many like us. There are more things to do for our communities. And if you ask what is the takeaway from this story, I would say responding to community needs can bring more trust between the community and the officials. Showing solidarity is the highly potential to strengthen resilience among people in need, often the same people who are the most vulnerable to the extremist drivers. Our research showed that people are still concerned about extremist activity in area, ISIS in particular. Al-Abbasi is one of the areas that is still struggling to avoid resurgence of violence, extremism. In Al-Abbasi subdistricts with high level of uncertainty about the future, ongoing ISIS attacks, the reported presence of sleeper cells and continuous presence of ISIS elements in the region, people still do not think that the resurgence will happen. We know that in Al-Abbasi, the community level of awareness has significantly increased around the risk of ISIS resurgence, but we should be cautious in approaches. If it does happen, research shows that the resulting economic collapse in the subdistrict would be a major push factor of and might benefit the terrorist group, would provide and recruit, and it might be later on a significant pull factor. We must remember that the ideology is not eradicated, even though many less people are attracted by it. Thank you, and you can sparkle your question over the chat. Thank you.
So much, Zainab. We have a chance now to take some questions, if there are any on the Iraq story. So there's a question from Deidre, who started the LPCs, LDCs.
It started in 2017 as a result of a local peace agreement. As mentioned by Sahar in the introduction, it started by a local organization named Senate for Peacebuilding, and in cooperation and partnership with US IP. And then later on, many international actors continued supporting those central and even sub-district local peace committees.
And we have another question, Zainab, from Maria, asking if the coordination happened in person and what were best practices in doing online coordination, if any.
The coordination happened in, I would say, not in person physically because the curfew was still there, but we established the Zoom channel directly. We had the direct call from our team in partnership with Chemonics team, directly with the head of LPC, who personally provided all those emerged needs day by day, and we developed and designed the initiatives together, and we structured the implementation, and we kept our follow-up calls to even during and post the implementation. We replicated even later after 2 months because they reflect the successful and further needs, so we can support broader area and broader families. And absolutely, there is also, I think, in the last session, there is the general question and anything you might see as a link between the stories that have been told so far. And we'll continue after this. I don't want to steal more time from the whole panel. I can answer the later question over the chat while handing over to you, Sahar. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Zainab. And we can definitely go back with more questions for the Iraq team in the final discussion panel. We turn to our fourth story now from Guatemala. Between 1960 and 1996, Guatemala suffered a brutal civil war between government armed forces and leftist guerrillas. An estimated 200,000 people, mostly indigenous, were killed and hundreds of thousands displaced. The peace accords of 1996 did not immediately usher in an era of security and stability. Violence and organized crime were rampant. Impunity and corruption plagued already weak government, police, and judicial structures. Insecurity and massive economic inequality pushed people to migrate. Homicide rates shot up in the early 2000s. According to the International Crisis Group, the increase was linked to military and paramilitary groups that moved from counterinsurgency to crime after the end of Guatemala's civil war. Strengthening the justice system was widely considered key to helping the country stabilize and reduce levels of violence. Bowing to internal and international pressure, the Guatemalan government asked the United Nations to establish the International Commission Against Impunity in Guatemala, or the CICIG, in 2007. The work of the Commission yielded results. Between 2007 and 2017, CICIG's justice reform activities helped contribute to a 5% average annual decrease in murder rates in the country, compared with a 1% average annual rise among regional peers, according to the International Crisis Group. The CICIG is estimated to have contributed a net reduction of more than 4,500 homicides during this period. The commission was still plagued by accusations of corruption, and it was finally shut down in 2019. Judicial reform remained a key area of international support, and the United States government set up a framework for strengthening the justice system. Chemonics International has been working within that framework to improve access to justice for victims of crime and violence, targeting especially youth and women. With no specialized mechanisms or judges, women and youth whose rights had been violated by others or by the government itself had no recourse. The Guatemala Youth and Gender Justice Program worked to establish mechanisms for that recourse, to enable the justice system and other services to respond to the needs of juvenile offenders and victims, victims of gender-based violence, and victims of trafficking in persons. Grounded in the local systems responsible for these services, the YGJP promoted greater integration and coordination among actors in support of reducing violence and impunity. The project targeted reductions in recidivism among juvenile offenders and increases in prosecution rates of gender-based violence and trafficking in persons. We will now show a short video that explains one of the project's activities before we go on to hear from Hugo, the chief of party of the project, a story of how the pandemic offered a window of opportunity to increase access to these mechanisms.
How does access to justice for children and adolescents in Guatemala work? Let me tell you, it has changed a lot. Before, attention to victims was extremely slow, taking up to 24 hours. Victims and their families had to visit different justice institutions located in different areas, spending money and important time. If victims require protection measures, they had to visit 3 different courts. And for psychological evaluations, victims had to wait around 60 days. So, how did we help? The Youth and Gender Justice Project collaborated with the Public Ministry and 11 justice institutions that respond to youth victims to streamline specialized justice services. Together, designed, established, and implemented the Integral Attention Model for Childhood and Adolescents, MINA, a 24-hour single-windowed facility that provides immediate services specifically tailored to youth victims, including medical, psychological, legal, and investigative support. Since the inauguration of MINA in July 2019, there have been many aspects improved related to justice for children and adolescent victims and their families. Among the most important ones are: victims' attention has reduced from 24 hours to an average of 6 hours. Victims have to repeat their statements only twice, when before they were interviewed 20 times. Before, victims had to visit 6 different institutions to access to justice. Today, only one, MINA. Arrest warrants took 60 days, with MINA only 10 hours. And for protection orders, victims had to wait 3 months, but now they are provided immediately.
Okay.
And so we are joined by Hugo from Guatemala to talk about, to tell us the 4th story.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone. Good morning and good evening for the rest. My name is Hugo Ayala, former Chief of Party of the Youth and Gender Justice Project. So here's one case. We actually deal with it a couple of months ago. A baby was kidnapped by neighbors in a red area in Guatemala City, and the mother did not know what to do. So she called a neighbor. A neighbor offered her some advice that he heard from our campaign. And in that case, she told her to call MINA. She called immediately in MINA, and she presented the case that her baby was kidnapped. All the institutions at the same time offer all the help. And what is good about MINA is that we have a one-stop shop. One-stop shop meaning we have 13 institutions in the same building coordinating all the support that victims need. But at the same time, we have a judge that is not only providing warrants for the family or the babies, but also providing some detention orders for the criminals. The baby was found, thankfully, 10 hours later after his kidnap. And the kidnappers were detained 16 hours later. That is a big success for our system, judicial system, but it's also a big success for the victims. They did not, as the video said, we could help the victims and the relatives in the same day, in 10 hours. We solve the case, not only for another case, but also to present how, with willingness, you can succeed and do the right thing. There's also one advance that during the pandemic, we in a way we improve the system. Before, the judges couldn't or didn't want to receive any claims by phone. Nowadays, thanks to the project and through our strategy, people can present their claims through phone or even through email. Audiences, virtual audiences, are now in the process of being developed and being improved at the same time. We provided not only equipment, but also the mechanisms and procedures to succeed with that virtualization process. So this is a big success for Guatemala, and it's also a big improvement. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Hugo. And it was interesting for me to hear from you how you managed to, it was already a big achievement to have all these different institutions be a one-stop shop in a brick and mortar building, but to move everything online was an impressive achievement. And to then have people who are used to having audiences in person, especially judges, be more willing to accept virtual audiences. To me, that was an unexpected aspect of the pandemic. That meant that more individuals were willing to come forward when they had been afraid to do so in person, but were willing to do so
exactly.
Online.
One good practice that we had is that we identify leaders among the institutions. In our case, the Attorney General was the leader, and he provided with all the tools and also the building, but at the same time, she was also calling the other institutions to join the one-stop shop. So that was key in our successful procedure.
We have a chance now for any questions to Hugo before we proceed to the last story of the day and then to a general discussion.
I guess not.
Yeah, monitoring the chat. So maybe I can ask you, Hugo. Have you seen a significant sort of rise in the number of cases that are coming forward as a result of moving the process online?
Not necessarily. At the very beginning, we thought that maybe we were going to have more cases, but due to the pandemic and due to more violence among the family itself, because they've been locked up in their houses. But we have the same cases, though the time that those cases lasted are very short now. I mean, people can deal with a case for months, and nowadays, I guess the case that lasted the most was 24 hours. Before, if you wanted, for example, if a woman was harassed and needed to present a claim, she had to wait at least 2 days for a warrant. Then if she needed alimony for their babies, she needed to go to another judge.
Mm.
And then if she needed something else to get divorced, she needed to go to a third judge. We also, the project, tried to create a one-stop shop for women that allows her to ask for the 3 aspects in the same place.
Mm.
We unfortunately had to finish the project, to close out the project, but it's still in the process. We left all the procedures and all the mechanisms and all the pathways to build up and create the model.
Mm.
So judges now see another key factor that help us a lot is that we train the judges. And by training them, they were the ones who were training their peers.
Mm.
They were showing their peers how the virtualization was helping them to achieve more cases and to fasten them up. So that is been helping. Maybe not more cases, but they're faster now, and they don't have a lot of cases in storage.
Right. And this must increase confidence in the system. We have a few questions from the audience, Hugo. Garrett is asking if this system for reporting any type of crime, petty, non-violent, or just more serious crimes?
Any type of crimes against children.
Against children. Mm-hmm.
This model is just against children and youth till they're 17 years old.
Juveniles. And Ria is asking whether this one-stop shop, where it's located, and if there are other shops established in remote areas.
There is in the capital city, which 60% of the cases are presented.
Mm-hmm.
But before we close out the project, we created the other model in the second biggest city in the country, which is Quetzaltenango, in the high islands. Occidente, I can't remember, but it's the second biggest city in Guatemala.
Mm.
We couldn't inaugurate it or create it, though we provided with equipment and again all the models from and we adapted that model from the Maina in the capital city. We thought we could do it in a year, 2 more departments, but unfortunately, due to the closeout of the project, we couldn't do it.
Yeah. And Garrett is also asking whether there's a worry that the system could be used for, it could be misused by people. So what people putting in false claims or false reports to target, individuals as a result, whether because of a personal vendetta or other aims.
We heard about some cases, but in the femicide court, not in children cases.
Mm.
Most of these cases are high levels of crimes in created or provoked by their own parents most of the times.
Mm.
We at the same time created a parallel system with another state institution who can provide them with family, with another substitution family, so that they are not institutionalized.
Mm-hmm.
Because most of the cases, most of the perpetrators are relatives, close relatives.
Yeah.
So we don't want children to go to institutions, to shelters.
Right.
Created this whole system so that there are foster families who can provide them with shelter while their cases, or if we can find maybe a grandmother or a grandfather who can take care of them.
Mm. And there's a related question for Maria on this point, on how do you ensure that those who report are not re-traumatized? Do you also offer mental health support?
Definitely. We have psychologists. Actually, the children present their cases to a psychologist. They have in the Mina, they have a special room created for children with toys, with special seats, drawing spaces, and everything adapted to them. So the psychology is asking the child what exactly happened while the judges and the prosecutors and the defenders are in another room watching through a video. The psychologist has a special phone or earphone, where the judges and the prosecutors ask her questions so that she can ask those questions to the children. The children don't have contact with judges or prosecutors.
Interesting.
So the children are not re-victimized.
Mm. And have you heard echoes, Hugo, of the impact of this system amongst the community?
We didn't have time to do the research.
Mm. But anecdotally, did you see any sort of indication or anecdotal evidence that people's faith in the justice system had improved?
Yes, definitely. What we can, because we had monthly meetings with NGOs specialized on children, and they told us that they see that people who come to their organizations, they do have more belief in the state institutions due to Mina.
Thank you so much for sharing the story. We can definitely take more questions for Hugo in the last 20 minutes of discussion. Thank you so much, Hugo. We will now hear from Dr. Suzanne Jalbert, who unfortunately could not be with us live directly, but had prepared a video telling the story of women peace negotiators in Afghanistan, and how they found a way over the last few months to increase their participation in the peace process.
Fazia Kofi was returning to her home in Kabul after a visit to Parwan province on August 14th, when a group of gunmen opened fire on her vehicle. She survived her injuries, but it was clear someone had tried to kill her. Today, Ms. Kofi serves as one of 4 women on the Afghan government's peace negotiation team. The failed attempt to take her life underscores the high stakes in these negotiations. The Taliban have denied any role in Fazia Kofi was returning to her home in Kabul after a visit to Parwan province on August 14th, when a group of gunmen opened fire on her vehicle. She survived her injuries, but it was clear someone had tried to kill her. Today, Ms. Kofi serves as one of 4 women on the Afghan government's peace negotiation team. The failed attempt to take her life underscores the high stakes in these negotiations. The Taliban have denied any role in the attack, but did not express outrage over the violence or sympathy for the victim. Whoever was behind the assassination attack, the message to silence Fazia Kofi was indeed a message and an effort to silence women altogether. Ms. Kofi knows what life under the Taliban is like. Her 2 daughters, do not know. Her goal as a peace negotiator is to make sure they avoid their mother's experience and that her daughters live life without war. After 40 years of war, the prospect of peace in Afghanistan is a thrilling idea. For women, it is also terrifying. What if their rights vanish under a government that is partially Taliban controlled? The progress women have made over the last decade and the change in public opinion about the role of women is significant. Once, women were not permitted to work out of the house. Today, it is not only permitted, but it is supported by 76% of the people in the country, as according to an Asia Foundation survey. Now, this survey also found that nearly 2/3 of Afghans say that any politician who accepted a peace agreement that diminished the rights of women would lose their votes. The survey also found significant support for women receiving an education and for participating in politics. The Taliban have nominally recognized that it is in their political interest to at least talk about preserving the rights of women. That's why more and more Afghan women are coming together and standing up for their rights. The day after Ms. Kofi was attacked, women from 15 of the 34 provinces gathered in their respective provinces for a remarkable national press event. It was co-sponsored by the Women's Regional Network. Together, a joint declaration was issued outlining their shared values of what they want to see included in any peace settlement. They called for a ceasefire. They called for independent monitoring of that ceasefire. And they demanded what should rightfully already be theirs, a significant number of seats at the negotiating table. Not 1 seat, not 4 seats. They demanded, in fact, a full 30% of participants in the peace talks be women. They believe that 30% will provide a critical mass to guarantee women's voices will be heard. They believe a peace agreement must also include verifiable assurances that women not only maintain the gains they've fought so hard for over these last decades, but also achieve further gains through an inclusive, durable peace. As the Afghan ambassador to the USA stated, the future of women and of the nation are intertwined. Turning back the clock for Afghan women is a misguided attempt to break the cycle of violence in Afghanistan, and it would not lead to a true peace. There can be no retreat from the long struggle to achieve and maintain basic human rights for the women of Afghanistan. And it is a battle the international community must wage alongside Afghan women until the day those rights are assured.
And last month, the Provincial Women's Networks and Women in Peace Coalition released a joint statement entitled Afghan Women Demand a Just and Accountable Peace, which requests that international allies continue using their support and influence to hold the Afghan government, security forces, and media accountable for sustainable progress toward peace and to protect the human rights of all Afghan people, particularly women, girls, and other marginalized populations in the country. Also, 100 global leaders issued their open letter to support Afghan activists. What lessons can we attribute to Fawzia Kufi's story and Afghan peacebuilders? It really boils down to what can you do as an individual. For example, we will add a few resources in the chat box. But most importantly, speak up, says Dr. Suzanne. As a citizen of our global community, you must raise your voice to advocate for substantive involvement in the peace process and use personal power to elevate global conversations. We can engage neighbors and representatives, act today to support Afghan women, and as COVID pulls women down and slows their road to peace and security, we must help them stand. And we must stand alongside Afghan women until the day their rights are assured. Peace activist, member of the High Council for National Reconciliation, director of Women and Children Legal Research Foundation, Zarqa Yaftali said, although women have long suffered from more violence and exclusion, we are not victims. So especially during COVID times, an individual voice can make that difference for Afghan women who are fighting for equity, justice, and peace. So we have around 10 minutes left for discussion. And I would like to invite everyone, all the panelists, as well as all our participants and attendees to reflect on these stories, the takeaway from these stories, and try to answer the question, what do we think? So much of life has been impacted irreversibly by this pandemic, whether it's the way we work, the way we operate in our homes, the way that we teach our children, the way we socialize and engage. And I think for countries, for fragile and conflict-affected states, the way that we go about changing conflict dynamics in our conflict systems and building peace will also be irrevocably changed. So what do we think are the long-term impacts of COVID on peace building? And I'll turn this question over to our esteemed panelists, as well as you, the audience, to reflect on that.
I think for us has been an opportunity, because other way, if we didn't have the pandemic, the judges and the prosecutors wouldn't allow to have virtual audiences. Even though there was a chance to do it, we tried to do it in the project 3 years ago, and they didn't allow us. When they saw that all the cases were being filed and being in archives, they said, well, here we have an opportunity, and since the project is providing us with special equipment and capacity, training, and all the tools, let's do it. And we, as I said before, we had 2 leaders in this case. One magistrate of the Supreme Court and the general attorney. Those two persons, let's call it that way, they were key in the decision making of implementing the virtualization of the audiences in judicial process. We are lucky if they continue after the pandemic, if there will be an after pandemic, of course. But nowadays, they're doing almost 10 audiences a day. And before the pandemic, they were doing 1 or 2 audiences a day. They always had an excuse, because even with your phone, all the parties in the process can be in an audience, in a judicial audience. And there are ways to identify people by their personal ID, and they send before to the officials, before the audience, they send all their ID documents scanned, and that's one way of identifying the parties.
Yeah.
It's a very easy and fast way, even receiving testimonies.
And I think the move online has allowed for greater engagement, ironically, by different segments of society. But of course, challenges remain. A lot of people, take Amina, for example, in Zainab's story. She certainly doesn't have access to the online technology that we do. So I think there are definitely challenges remaining in how we can continually increase the scope of who is engaged in local peacebuilding efforts. From Rafi's story as well, people no longer being able to meet in person directly affects also the kind of behavioral change that you start to see coming up as a result of social pressure. But at the same time, the sort of silver lining of COVID is that, at least in Lebanon, it created a shared crisis that made previous conflict dynamics seem less urgent and less important, and diverted attention and created new mechanisms or new ways for local communities to be facing challenges in a more participatory and collaborative, inclusive manner. As opposed to the clashes of the past. Rafat, I'm curious, from in Yemen, how do you see COVID? What long-term impacts do you think it will have on local peacebuilding efforts?
To be honest, our main concern, on the ground right now in Yemen, there isn't much being reported for sure, but not only not being reported, in the initial months, we could tell from social networks, from people who know others who are falling sick. But in the last couple months, that has not been taking place anymore. I don't know, it's a mystery yet to be solved. How come there isn't as much happening now in Yemen? But the new concern that is there is more the issue of being left behind from the vaccination train. And if the world moves to lifting travel restrictions eventually, in the next 6 months as the vaccination takes place, there's very little that Yemen can do to get the vaccination to begin with, but also to be able to distribute it and actually vaccinate people at large scale. And so what would that mean for Yemenis is a big question, whether we would just be locked in essence in Yemen, not allowed to travel because countries will not want to get, and this is not only for Yemen, it's for a lot of countries in a similar situation. But I think that's kind of the next challenge in the longer term that we're looking for. So at the local level, people, communities, societies are no longer restricted by COVID. But the big question is what happens next.
Absolutely. A few comments from participants. As COVID-19 has led to social distancing, Cosmo says there are direct effects of the rising of a unity, the feeling of being in the same boat and the same problems connect us all. With problems, opportunities arise. A great example already is this Congress. Very true. Michael also had a comment from Northern Ireland, where governments have turned to community and voluntary sector to lead the COVID-19 response. The challenge is to ensure that the sector does not retreat back into bunkers where the sector is not tolerated rather than appreciated. And I think we're seeing that also with frontline healthcare workers. The extent to which, we go out and clap for them every night, but to what extent is this going to, change the way that we value that work in the future is the conversation that definitely needs to be had. I think in Lebanon, the public pressure around this, the government's inability to deal with the crisis and provide the kind of support that you see in Europe or in other countries has meant that the level of anger has risen against the government for putting people in this position where they have to choose between their health or their income and their livelihood. Tonight, as we speak, actually, there are protests and there are road blockages and burning tires in Beirut. And ironically, in our conflict system, things have to get worse before the system can be shaken up enough for us to see more sustainable change and a true sort of disenfranchisement of the sectarian political system from the citizenry. Any final comments from our audience? We have about a minute. Or any final words from our panelists?
I guess just to thank everyone for joining, and it's been really fascinating for me to hear the stories from all the different countries and what we share together in this very difficult time, but also inspiring to see what people are able to do. And so thanks a lot for this opportunity.
Thank you very much, Rafat, Rafi, Zainab, and Hugo, and Dr. Suzanne from afar. And thank you very much for all of our participants for your engagement and your questions. We thank you for joining us today, and we hope you enjoy the rest of the conference.